Hello and welcome to this video. And on this video, I'm going to be going through the 10 music artists or bands that ruined music. These are music artists or bands that pioneered stuff, but rather than pioneering positive stuff, they brought in what I think are quite negative approaches into the music business, which has resulted in us being this awful situation now that we find ourselves in musically. Wouldn't you agree? Now, before we start this is a top 10. I'm not ranking these. These are in time-based order. So I'm going to start off with the first that I think really ruined the music and move right up to contemporary music with the last. And also, a lot of these artists on this list are fantastic, brilliant artists. I am not criticizing them as artists. What I am saying is their influence, despite the fact that they pioneered quite incredible stuff. And in fact, some of the incredible stuff that they pioneered is the stuff that in the end brought the music industry down. So with that, I think we can begin. Are you ready for this one? Okay, right, let's have a go. So at number one, I have the Monkees. Yes. So what is it about rock music? And by rock music, I mean reggae, funk, soul, all the music that we grew up listening to, the golden age of popular music, personified by Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the Bob Dylan and Shaka Khan, all these brilliant artists we absolutely love. What is important about them? Now, I think what it is that you had a combination in that era of music, of popular music, i.e. music that was bought in the millions by everybody, but music that had both a compositional and musical weight, but it also had a lyrical and political weight as well. And so there's a lot of weight going on back then. A lot of weighty music was happening throughout the 60s and 70s. Now, I think the reason for that is because a generation had come up. They didn't want to live their lives and have a future written out for them by their parents. They wanted to change the way society was. So in the 1960s, young people became very revolutionary, and they started looking around for other ways of thinking. And of course, young people love popular music, so the popular music began to shift. And within rock and roll, especially with people like Buddy Holly and the Crickets and maybe the Everly Brothers, there were certain rock and roll outfits that came out that were self-contained. They composed the music, they performed the music, and they were the pop star. And in some cases, they had something to say. Now, early rock and roll was all about, teenage rebellion. But with the emergence of Bob Dylan in the early 60s, rock music moved towards being more political, more expressing the individual, and more expressing the true thoughts of that generation. I think the band that personifies this more than any other band is possibly the Beatles. And the Beatles affect culture more than any other music artist in the 20th century. Not only are they hugely popular, but musically they seem free to experiment and do whatever they want to do. And they sing about more than just driving around in cars and, and being attracted to the opposite sex. Sorry to use that word so early in the morning. It's quite early in the morning here. So the music business, I think, were confounded by these new hippies that were coming out doing all this weird music, but it was selling. And they thought, well, that's good. Now, can we gather up what the Beatles are doing and what the Rolling Stones are doing and maybe even what the Beach Boys are doing or the Doors? Could we manufacture that ourselves? And I see the Monkees as being the first wholehearted attempt by the music industry to create a band that seemed like the Beatles. And so they pulled 4 guys together from unlikely places. One English guy, American guy. And these people on the whole were more used to working in television and the media than they were working in music, although they could all play to some extent. Mickey Dolenz, who took over the drums, I think he could play either guitar or keyboards, but it didn't matter. He was told to play the drums. And if you go and look at some of the old photographs of the Monkees playing, you will see that Mickey's setup is very strange. He often sets the kit up so he doesn't have to cross his hands over, showing that he had to be able to get that rock beat nailed in as quick a time as they possibly could. I think Mike Nesmith, that played guitar, was actually a better keyboardist. And then was it Pete York who played the keyboards? He had to play keyboards because that was the instrument he played. So this wasn't a band that came together in an organic manner. This was created by the record labels. And they built a TV show around it. Now, when I was a kid, they were still showing this TV show in the 70s here in the UK. And I absolutely loved the Monkees. I grew up listening to those songs, and many of their tunes, I think, are fantastic songs. And they ape that sort of fresh 60s youth movement very well. And there are a number of fans who love the Monkees. And I don't think the Monkees, if you look at them on paper, they could have been a lot worse, but they weren't. And I think that is because there was actually, those kids that they pulled in were part of the culture, that revolutionary culture, and they wanted to be involved, and they fought the label to try and get their own songs and get their own way. And so very quickly, the Monkees moved from being this teeny bop band on the TV to making a film like Head with Frank Zappa, which I feel is a stronger movie than 200 Motels is by Frank Zappa. Sorry to say that. I think Head is a very good example of a lot of the countercultural stuff that was going on. So the Monkees weren't just pretty boys. They did have something to say, and there was a weight there. And I think that's down to the power of the revolution that was going on in the 1960s, that even when the record companies and those cigar-chewing moguls, tried to put something together, they still couldn't fight the kids, and the kids come up with something. And so I am very fond of the Monkees. But what the Monkees do is they show that the record companies can take something that's organic and they can package it up. And for every band like Nirvana, we have a Bush, don't we? A band that's obviously been signed up or put together by the record companies to try and fulfill a need that another label has done organically. And I think if we see rock and roll as just normal musicians, normal artists getting to control the narrative. And by the end of the 60s, we have bands like Led Zeppelin with their manager Peter Grant dictating how much they're going to earn from the gigs, dictating how the albums will be marketed, and taking all the spoils for themselves. And I think the music industry must have looked at this and go, we need to divide and conquer. And so the model that was created by the Beatles, now that had gone on before, but I don't think it had ever been done so rigorously and with an idea of really manufacturing something that wasn't there. When the record companies pulled together, a good-looking singer and put them with a good songwriter and a good producer, big pre-rock and roll, and you end up with stuff like How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? I think that what's happening there is straight down the line. Everyone can see that. It's not being questioned. But the Monkees, there's a bit of subterfuge, isn't there? There's a bit of a con going on. And that con carries on in the industry, moving towards artists like Milli Vanilli. And now, when we watch an artist perform, especially with the advent of computer technology, are they really performing? Is it really them? Where does the artist begin and where does the, just marketing and promotion end? And I think we can really boil that down to the Monkees. Right, so that's who I've got at number one. At number two, I have a band that emerges around about the same time as the Monkees, but they occupy something else that has always niggled me in music. And this is the idea that sort of educated, literate music critics put onto rock and roll. They don't like rock and roll or rock music becoming sophisticated. Again, it's the system trying to control the narrative. The system would rather have some educated music critic controlling the narrative than a bunch of drugged up musicians controlling the narrative that they can't control themselves, you see. If you think I'm being a bit sort of conspiracy theorist here, in my life working in the music industry and in the educational industry, you see how this mechanism works, how actual problems emerge and people try and cover them up. They try and cover their tracks. They try and take a situation which isn't going their way and twist it so it will go their way. And record companies that got burnt by artists that probably negotiated too good deals, were able to dictate to somewhat what they wanted to do. And we really see this in the history of the music industry. By the 90s, you can see huge artists like George Michael and Prince trying to take on the record companies and basically losing. So this battle went on all the time. And I think music critics played a really important part. And I think there's an aspect of punk which is partly manufactured by the music industry to try and bring in people that are less musically able and are more dependent on the record company for their success. There's an artiness there. There's a sort of knowing we're cool and we don't need to do the musical things required to entertain people. Now, the band I think that personifies this more than anything else is Velvet Underground, which is the band I've got at number 2. Now, of course, Velvet Underground was put together by Andy Warhol. Andy Warhol had a view of art, which he saw art as almost being a product of mass production. He was interested in the popular elements of art, in advertising. And so it's very interesting that he decides to put a rock band together, but the band he puts together, which contains some incredibly talented people. Lou Reed as a songwriter was a brilliant songwriter, and John Cale as a musician was a brilliant musician. And I think the Velvet Underground's importance was immeasurable to rock and roll history. But the critics love a band like that. They love to be able to point at that and say, that's the real deal, right? Especially if they're smacked out their head on drugs and they seem to be living the rock and roll lifestyle. The rock and roll lifestyle is a byproduct of the creation of rock music. And when it shouldn't be irrelevant, really. But you see, as rock music develops, this idea, almost like a romantic idea, of this sort of libertarian rock and roll star. And that really is true of people like Hendrix and the Rolling Stones and the bands that were sort of the naughty boys of rock in the 1960s. But with the Velvet Underground, I feel, brilliant as their stuff is, this is the emergence of pretentiousness. Now, pretentiousness often gets laid at progressive rock store. I can't see what they're pretending to do at all. But there's an arty snootiness. There's a use of like cool haircuts and dark sunglasses that emerges. And although Velvet Underground don't sell a ton of records, by the 1980s, that aesthetic has been fixed. With bands like The Fall and the Jesus and the Mary Chain, it's almost like the Emperor's New Clothes. I went through the 80s and 90s, begrudgingly thinking The Fall must be a great band because critics went on about them. And it wasn't until I got a certain age and I was listening to them and more actually realising what a twat Mark E. Smith was. So many stories I heard about how he operated. And you think, why should he operate like that? Why does he get away with it? It's because everybody's going, oh, all hail Mark E. Smith, all hail. And I think that it has the roots, this pretentiousness has its roots in the Velvet Underground, okay? And I think that bands that have always been championed by the critics, because the critics don't know anything about music, it's easier to point to something that seems artistically valid. And the Velvet Underground's associated with Andy Warhol gave them that. Now, this is not to say, Venus in Furs is a brilliant song, Heroin is a brilliant song, Waiting for My Man. These are all great songs, and I'm not saying they're not. But there is a certain slavish connection to viscerality, fake viscerality that we see emerge with the Velvet Underground. And that moves to a split in music. Out of the Velvet Underground, we then get bands like the Stooges, New York Dolls. And for me, the band that really personifies that sort of pseudo-intellectual, pretentious viscerality is the Ramones, who what I've got at number 3. Now, I know I always upset people when I have a dig at the Ramones. Now, partly it's because I don't get the Ramones. I love visceral rock music, but for me, visceral rock music is hard to pull off, and it requires skill because you have to be able to dig in and be deep down and dirty, like AC/DC or like a Motorhead or like a Sex Pistols, who I saw live in 2008 when they reformed. And they were a decent rock band who could rock. Now, I'm sure everyone's going to shout that that's what the Ramones are like, but it doesn't sound like this to me. This sounds like a shouty band of people that never really get out of second gear. It's all like this, and I've never really understood it. But again, we have the black leather jackets, we have the black sunglasses, and we have the haircuts of the Velvet Underground. What the British punk movement did was a lot more connected, I think, to real working class values and trying to create a voice, although there was that schism with the Sex Pistols between Malcolm McLaren and John Lydon, Johnny Rotten. Of course, I side with Johnny Rotten, who I think was a genius. But I don't hear that with the Ramones. I know one song by them, and yet I've heard all the albums. It all sounds the same to me. And yet to this day, you will see teenage girls walking down the road wearing a Ramones t-shirt, a band that they don't listen to and is only there because their dads think it's a cool band. And the reason why they think it's a cool band is because they were always championed by the music critics. There's a pretentiousness here that emerges that I feel has been detrimental to some of the greatest bands in history, like King Crimson, like Yes, like Genesis, like the Mahavishnu Orchestra, like Weather Report. Brilliant music has been shoved to the side because of people like the Ramones. Now, I'm sure if you're in a club and they play one of their tracks and you jump up and down and sing, oi, 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 or whatever it is, that is quite an exciting thing to do, and I understand that. But I do believe the Ramones are the ones that really bring in this sort of Americanized fetishism with sort of punk rock, the sort of fake punk rock that we then see with Blink-182 and bands like Offspring and that whole thing. And we are moving inexorably towards Nirvana. But let's get onto them later, shall we? At number 4, I have a band that I have championed. This is possibly the most influential band in music history. Now, in the 1970s, we would have said that the most influential band was the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or maybe even Led Zeppelin. But not now, because music's completely changed. Music is now the true embodiment of that aesthetic Andy Warhol pervade, which the Velvet Underground never were they? This idea that machines can make music, that the artists are faceless dummies that just stand there representing the music, and that this stuff is just about the banal, it's just about the repetitive. Of course, this is all pioneered by an early 70s progressive rock band, or we could say more of a krautrock band, couldn't we? And that band, of course, is Craftwork. Craftwork start off as an improvising avant-garde music band. They're in the camp with the sophisticated music, but they establish an aesthetic which is so rooted in postmodernism, and they push it so far out, and they are able, by moving towards utilising machines and exploring conformity and singing about banality, they create an aesthetic that is absolutely wonderful. Anybody who listens to any of their, like Autobahn, these are great, great songs. They were able to do that because in the end, they were true musicians and they could balance that, possibly influenced by a lot that was going on in modern orchestral music, classical music, you want to call that, and really, pulling from minimalism, which was also pulled on by people like Mike Oldfield or Jean-Michel Jarre or even Tangerine Dream. And Kraftwerk occupy that space. They also remove rock music of every semblance of soul and blues. Okay? And that, I think, is the most detrimental aspect of modern popular music, is that the soul is no longer there. If we listen to a modern pop song, in its DNA, 60-70% is down to Kraftwerk, a genius band, all right, a genius band, but a band responsible, I think, more than any other band for the current musical predicament we find ourselves in, where anybody with a set of ears that wants to listen to something and feel something has to scrap around a long time to find that going on in modern popular music or even modern rock music. Kraftwerk was picked up by a number of different music forms. It influenced, I think, punk to somewhat, and then went on to go into the sort of new wave sounds of the late 70s. But perhaps its biggest influence was on two genres. One would have been the combination in a sort of Parliament funkadelic approach to dance music. You put that together and you sort of get disco, especially in the hands of someone like Giorgio Moroder. And also those machine beats start to influence hip-hop, especially with people like African, Bambaataa, Planet Rock, and all that type of thing. So by the time we get to the 80s, music is starting to move towards that machine-like, and if you take that, the sort of machine-like aspect of popular music, coming out of hip-hop and dance music, which by the 1980s has turned into this sort of high-energy dance music. If we take that and then combine that with the thing that the Monkees brought in, which was rather than having a band, you've got an artist that sort of personifies the zeitgeist. I think this all comes together in the shape of the person I've got at number 5, which is Madonna. Now, I don't think I've ever chatted about Madonna on this channel, but I am going to now. Now, I am of the age now where I can track this because I can remember Madonna's first record coming out. I can remember her emerging with this sort of high-energy dance track, Get Into the Groove, which I actually quite liked at the time. And she emerges sort of personifying what young girls wanted to be. And she was very famous for having a stomach showing. And there was a slightly more overt sexuality in Madonna in the early days than we had seen with pop artists, female pop artists that had gone before. Of course, she was drawing from Blondie in a way. And Blondie brought into sort of the new wave punk movement an aesthetic that had come from film. And that had got forgotten in the 1970s. But Madonna was almost like a film star in the same way Elvis Presley, or even more Marilyn Monroe, which she aped in her Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend video, which was called Material Girl. But with songs like a Virgin, Madonna brings in this idea of the pop starlet who is more overtly sexual, and this idea is then sold to young girls. And I think this is possibly one of the most detrimental concepts in modern popular music. I find it utterly shocking in a world which is supposedly politically correct, and we are trying to protect people from all sorts of bad ideas and bad influences, that tracks like WAP by Cardi B and songs by Nicki Minaj, that those songs and videos are pushed out under the idea that it is some sort of triumph for feminism. This to me can only be detrimental. And I can't help but remember when Madonna decided to bring out the tune Justify My Love, and then she brought out that sex book, and she brought out an overt sexuality into the pop market and an overt female sexuality. Now, I think as Madonna develops, that by her second album, Like a Virgin, I think that's her second album, the songwriting gets a lot stronger. She's pulling in influences, and I think production from Nile Rodgers by that point. She's also working with Reggie Lucas from Miles Davis's band, but that's another video altogether. That's totally bizarre. But I think by the time she reaches tunes like a Prayer, these are sublime pop songs. I think Madonna's power was a lot of her imagery and a lot of the stuff that was embodied in her was true. And the name Madonna and I'll keep banging it, it's banging the camera. The name Madonna and the album title Like a Virgin, she does really penetrate an age-old sort of trope in our culture, which is the virgin whore trope. And she does this absolutely brilliantly. So I believe it's powerful stuff, backed up by brilliant songwriting, whether it's her or a songwriting team. There's some incredible songwriting. She's always on the on top of production, of new ideas. She seems to follow the zeitgeist brilliantly for a time. I can remember Vogue coming out, and that just summed up a sort of American gay dance culture at that time. I can remember her bringing the track Music out, where she was sort of purveying the sort of production that was going on with Pharrell and all those type of stuff. And for a certain amount of time, she was able to do that. Of course, nobody can do that forever. And now she has almost become a parody of herself as she approaches 70 years old and still thinks that she can go out and be the femme fatale. You know, most likely because she herself has swallowed a whole bunch of rubbish from feminism, that this is some sort of way that women can express themselves, to use a title of one of her songs, which of course very rich women can, but not some rich women. They'll just end up in a cycle of exploitation. And I think Madonna's responsible for all of that in modern popular music. Right, so the sort of 1980s movement towards glitz and glamour and pointy bras and opulence and all that type of thing seems to come to a crashing halt at the end of the 80s with the advent of serious political rap, the emergence of electronic dance music, and the collapse of that sort of glam rock, glam metal with bands like Bon Jovi and Poison and Winger and all those types of bands. And by the time we get to the early 90s, the journey of rock and punk music, which has started off with that sort of obscure Velvet Underground approach, which I think sold something like tens of thousands of albums at that time, that moves through a journey. Rock and punk move through a journey skirting the mainstream, often underneath the mainstream. But in 1991, a garage band from Seattle emerges called Nirvana. And by their second album, Nevermind, for some reason, that acts as a sort of anathema or tonic to the glitz and glamour of rock music at that time. And this album goes on to sell millions and millions and millions. And we see all that alternative thing that the critics so worshipped, that Velvet Underground, the Stooges, and Black Sabbath, and all those bands, you know, Iron Maiden, Napalm Death, all those things, the Pixies, you know, the Residents, all this obscurity, all this otherness that exists in rock music crosses over to the mainstream. And they go on to sell around about 30 million albums. Nirvana is, without a doubt, the most important band of the 1990s. And they completely reshape rock music and popular music. We see the effect of that band affecting films. You get grunge films, you get grunge fashion, you get grunge stars, film stars. You know, you get River Phoenix overdosing at the Viper Rooms. So the whole culture suddenly changed. He's down to Nirvana. Of course, there's a whole bunch of other, Seattle rock bands. You think of Soundgarden going on to sell millions, but Soundgarden still seem to retain that undergroundness. Nirvana don't. Excuse me. And despite their attempt to go even further out on In Utero, the third album, Kurt Cobain finds himself in a very unenviable place for somebody who has the aesthetic worldview that he has, ending up with him blowing his brains out in 1994, thus turning him into a martyr and sealing off Nirvana to then be the tombstone of rock music and send rock music to a circular hell where bands just go round and round the same aesthetics over and over again, swinging from Kiss to Nirvana to Kiss to Nirvana, round and round, while the computers take over and it just moves away from the visceral roots that it first personified it. And worse than that, and I haven't got them on the list, but I'm going to lump them in, is Nirvana then begat the Foo Fighters, the dad rock band that personifies the banal, just personifies a sort of middle of the road conservative aspect of rock music that we're supposed to grudgingly respect because they're so workmanlike and because Dave Grohl is a nice chap, despite the fact that he has now fathered someone out of wedlock, which we're supposed to go, ooh, remember when our rock stars, did that anyway and we just took it for granted? But now, the Max Bygraves of rock, we've shocked because he's fathered someone out of wedlock. He actually went out on tour and had sex with someone that wasn't his wife. And this is where we get, and it comes directly out of Nirvana. Rock music has been decapitated. It has been nullified. It has been made impotent by this band. And it's not their fault. It's down to the fact that they were so successful in selling rage to teenagers, especially middle-class teenagers who wanted to feel bad about the fact that they were middle-class teenagers. I have recently reviewed the top 10, and stuck in there is Linkin Park. Now, if ever there was a monkeys of that grunge scene, it was Linkin Park. And here they are, making pop records dressed up as some sort of teenage angst. They're millionaires. There's no angst there whatsoever. And it's still getting in the top 10 on Spotify. It's an incredible thing. Thank you, Nirvana. Another band, I think, that has ruined music. And with that, I now move on to the next band, which I did organically, because the next band on the list is Linkin Park. Have they ever written a decent riff? Have they ever come up with something that gets right down and dirty like the AC/DC and kicks you in the guts? Have they ever scared you with anything that is truly countercultural? Or is it just moaning about having an empty life or whatever it is that they want to sing about? Have they ever done what a rock band should do? They didn't even look like a rock band. They jump around in their sort of toned down hip hop garb. And the only thing I feel with Linkin Park that placed them in anywhere where I shouldn't have just utter contempt for them is the awful demise of Chester Bennington, their singer, which seems to be a reaction to Chris Cornell committing suicide. And this is a long trail of musicians that have committed suicides coming out of Nirvana. But it doesn't change the fact that Linkin Park are sort of like the poster boys of this. It's just so callous. They might believe in it. Maybe their fans believe in it. But I'm afraid I do not believe in it. And by the 90s, this has run its course. There's some incredible music by the 90s. The advent of these superstar rock bands enabled bands like Radiohead to come in that were much more experimental. And even bands right at the back of that movement, like Mr. Bungle. Think about that, or Fishbone. This is a renaissance for rock bands. So we have that to thank. But by the end of the 1990s, that all came crashing down with the artist I've got at number 8. Now, this artist, I don't think, had any role in really achieving the awful things they achieved. And I don't think they're the only guilty party for doing this. But it's the one I'm going to point to because I see her first single as being a cultural shift. I enjoyed the music of the 90s. There was a lot of stuff that was in the charts that was absolutely brilliant. Even bands like here in the UK, Blur or Oasis and Pulp, and bands like Supergrass were great bands with great songs, and you felt like they had something to say. But it all changed in 1999 when Britney Spears brought out Hit Me Baby One More Time. And I can remember this went straight into number 1, and it was marketed at the world as being the new phenomenon. And I can remember watching this teenage girl in a slightly post-Madonna overt sexuality gone really wrong because she was dressed in a schoolgirl's uniform. The whole thing seemed dodgy to me, with her pleading, with the audience to hit her just one more time. It's salacious, shocking, but also brilliantly written teeny bop pop. Now, Britney Spears became a phenomenon and changed the shape of music. We see popular music moving over to a model back to the idea of how much is that doggy in the window, back to the idea of the starlet with her songwriters and her production and her makeup and hair and her cool videos where she can jump around, tantalizing and titillating the audience. Of course, Britney herself, as soon as that happens, that she's playing to 9-year-old girls, she wants to grow up like the 9-year-old girls want to grow up. And actually with Britney Spears, I think, especially when she hooked up with Pharrell and certain other incredible producers, brought out some brilliant songs. Toxic is a brilliant song. I'm a Slave is a brilliant song. But you can't get away from the fact that unlike Madonna, I don't think Britney had the visualization. What a surprise, because that is exactly what the record companies want. And so she gets pushed to a sort of over-sexualized image, which then turns down into a sort of marketing through mental health issues. And then the whole question about whether she's being controlled and this whole high sort of almost you get into this sort of child star territory. And the narrative becomes the sort of doomed child star, even though she's now in her 40s. That seems to go on. She's been infantilized. Is that the word? When you make someone into an infant forever and ever. This is an awful thing. This is not grown-up music. This is not, Neil Young or Lou Reed or David Bowie. This is something else. And it personifies the whole music industry since 2000, when everything changes. And now we have a situation where all popular music is basically Britney Spears and all rock music is basically Linkin Park. And the whole thing is just back in control of the record companies who are slowly now leeching any control and financial remuneration from those artists. The old artists can still squeeze a little bit more money out of their back catalogue through Spotify whilst they moan that the deals they've got aren't good because they're on a major label and the major label's still taking 60% of the Spotify profits. But deep down, what we have now is if you want to work in the music industry, you don't make music. You have to look good, be salacious, you have to have a media profile, you have to have a production team that will blast out a whole bunch of machine-made music while everybody around you, above you, who is pulling the strings to make you huge, drops themselves on the writing royalties for your songs. That is the deal. It is truly the deal with the devil. Whatever Robert Johnson signed on the Crossroads was nothing to the deal that you now have to sign if you want to work in popular music, okay? Now, we could say, with the advent of these very pretty stars, jumping around, the Justin Timberlakes and the Genie in the Bottle, Christina Aguilera's, and all these artists that emerge, and you see an edge coming. Here in the UK, we had Amy Winehouse come in, and then that big gap people like Adele, who took over the whole world musically. And another British star emerges in the 2000s, who I think is a good artist. I'm not going to say they're great, but I do think they're a good artist. But they really changed the shape of modern popular music in a way which I don't think that is that great. And of course, at number 9, I have Ed Sheeran, the ginger wonder from Great Britain. There he is with his acoustic guitar and his loop pedal. And he can make wonderful music full of catchy, lovely hooks that you won't be able to get out of your head. So catchy and hooky are these that you will forgive him for being an ugly ginger bloke, thus bringing in something that I find really annoying. And this is the 4-chord song. I'm going to lay the blade with Ed Sheeran. The 4-chord song, which has no real musical or lyrical merit because it's pulling from hip-hop. It has that slight smell of hip-hop and rappiness about it. And it's all about the hooks. And you can't get the hooks out of your mind. And you think it's clever. Suddenly, rather than being Britney Spears, who we know has nothing to do with the records, Ed Sheeran's a songwriter. Oh, he's a good songwriter, I can tell he's a good songwriter because he's an ugly ginger bloke And before you know it, the record companies are signing up many four-chord wonders that have that smell of a singer-songwriter when it's not real singer-songwriting. And before you know it, we have a whole bunch of people who look like they live on the streets with beard and face tattoos. I'm levelling all that with Ed Sheeran. I know Ed Sheeran's got no face tattoos, but he doesn't need one because he's ginger. You know, and the last ginger pop star we had was Mick Hucknall. You know how well that went, don't we? You know, he seems like a nice bloke. I actually think as he's developed as a songwriter, he is a very good songwriter. One of my favourite songs by him is the one he wrote for Justin Bieber, or Justin Bieber as I call him, and I will carry on calling him Justin Bieber for this video, which is Love Yourself, which is a very great song, very simple, and is perhaps Justin Bieber's finest moment. It is, isn't it? I'm going to have a drink of my Coca-Cola at this point because I'm talking so fast and so quickly with so many words that my mouth's drying up. So I'm going to just do a bit of product placement if you want to. I've just signed up for that on YouTube, so I'm sure Coca-Cola want to get, you know, the 10,000 views here. The real thing. Right. We're at number 10. I wish I knew more about this bloke, but I thought I don't know anything about this bloke because I am going to personify the middle-aged music fan that has lost so much interest in popular music that I really don't know about anybody who is on the contemporary scene, except everybody knows something about this bloke because the media is all over him. The media loved him and now they hate him. And it is, of course, Kanye West. Now, what awful thing did Kanye West bring to music? I don't know what it is, but I feel he has done something. I probably don't know enough, but shall I have a go? I first came across Kanye West quite a few years ago, where he took a song by Shaka Khan off one of my favourite albums, I Feel For You, and he sped it up and he rapped badly over it. Now, I think at the time, maybe hip-hop had lost its roots in taking good, solid soul, funk and jazz records and creating a sample. And maybe Kanye West, from his position of privilege, because he's a privileged man, you know, he's not the product of the streets. He's the product of an educated black civil rights family. He's been brought up in a certain way, and an artistic way, and I respect that. And I do think that guy is a creative guy. But I think this idea that I've heard over and over again, that this is a musical genius, I do not see it. And I think Kanye West trades on the worst aspects of postmodernism. And so he feels that he could come to this country and stand up on stage in Glastonbury where all those incredible bands, and just by him singing badly a Queen song, this somehow proves he's a musical genius. I think up to a certain point, he was able to manipulate the media somewhat, but of course it all comes crashing down. It almost comes crashing down because of his own arrogance and self-belief that he is such an important person. And he seems to personify something that is emerged in music recently, and I would call it glamorized incompetence. The aspect that makes a musician good is the self-loathing which drives them towards perfectionism. A great artist always feels that what they're doing is not up to scratch and it needs to get pushed and worked on to attain a level where they can see that it is worthwhile. The public can't see this, and that drive towards perfectionism is a really powerful thing within popular music. With Kanye West, it seems to be the opposite. He revels in the fact that because of his status as being Kanye West, he can just go bibbidi bop bop, or do whatever he wants to do, or turn up with a bag over his head, you know, walk around with his wife that's got nothing on, and all this should be seen as being great art. It is literally the emperor's new clothes. And throughout all of this list, it has always been the emperor's new clothes. That is the thing that I find so annoying. And the music industry and the critics and the sort of culture of the music industry wants to point in a different place and make you think that the Emperor's Clothes are somewhere else. They're not. It's hidden in plain sight. And modern music artists now, really, what is their talent? Because even Britney Spears looked cute. You know, she could sort of sing and she could dance. I can't dance like Britney Spears. But how many artists out there are just there because they are artists, because they're famous, because they've been manipulated by the media to be placed in front of us? And it really is literally the Emperor's new clothes. The Emperor has placed these new clothes on them. The trappings of the modern media star, where it's more important what they are doing that is salacious or what they are doing which is countercultural. And none of it's countercultural because they just reek of the glitterati. They reek of the elites. Right, and we are supposed to respect that. The whole Kardashian idea of popular culture that is infused. And I do put it on Kanye West. I think he's the guy that embodies it for me. So those are the 10 artists I feel that ruined music. There are many others, and some of these are here just to represent. But that movement that emerges with the Monkees in the 1960s, where the record companies suddenly feel that they can ape this wonderful thing that's emerged organically in youth culture, has a journey through it, through the pretentiousness of punk, through the pretentiousness of indie bands, through the mass production and machine grooves of Craftwork, into the idea of, you know, salacious imagery personified by Madonna and Britney Spears, and the decapitation of rock as a powerful force by Nirvana, ending up with these just whinge bands like Linkin Park, and then the emergence of the fake songwriters of Ed Sheeran and the, you know, culture vultures of Kanye West hanging over modern culture, ready to pounce with something on Twitter or some ridiculous outfit that we're supposed to think has some sort of relevance and importance. Whoa, that was full of some vitriol, wasn't it? Product placement yet again. Come on, Coke, give it a go. Oh, it tastes like the real thing, that does. Unlike all these artists who aren't the real thing. You're shouting, Andy. So, yeah, I have done my bit for this month, you know. Let's see how many views this gets. I'm going to say this at the end. Anybody who knows me, you know, I'll do some intellectual videos, but every now and then I'll dip my toe in the clickbait world. Let's see how many views this one gets. You know, have a look at it. And if that's the case, it's because these artists pull the views, even by people who hate them. And I keep every time I bang the table, it bangs my camera. I've done it wrong. There's always something incompetent about me, and it gets on my nerves. But look, anyway, so if you like this video, stick a like on it. If you want to see some more, click subscribe. None of those things cost any money, and none of them will hurt you. And it will help me in my upward rise to cultural power. I want to have the sort of cultural power that a Rick Beato and Adam Neely has. And you know I will use it for good, don't you? I won't turn it into an evil, despotic monster, will I? If you want to support me in my quest for world domination, you can become a Patreon. Okay, and the link's down below. Go and click on it. You can become a free member of Patreon and you will get some free stuff, but not quite as good as the people who pay. They get more. But if you don't want to do that, but you want to give me a little tip to keep me in Coke bottles until my, you know, sponsorship comes through, you could drop a little bit of money into my PayPal tip jar. And you should, you know, because you've watched all the other YouTubers. Even my pleading for money and subscriptions and likes is more entertaining than anybody else. That's why you're still watching. And also, look at this beautiful room I'm in. It's a beautiful room. And I'm giving you a different view of it today. You can see my lovely stereo here. I've been listening to this one. This one here. Do you want to see what I've been listening to, viewers? That's what I've been listening to. I've got a bit of a stiff back. But, you know, I have been very lucky to get the use of this room by the Jellyman Heritage Arts Charity, a charity set up to support new artists and also therapists and all sorts of different creative stuff. And if you want to support us doing this and you feel that this is a benefit, and I'm going to be putting on events. I've got an event coming up quite soon. It might be announced, but we're going to have an incredible event here. An event with a British jazz rock fusion legend. Anyway, we're done. I am going to finish now. I'm going to walk around again and switch the camera off. I'll keep talking so you know I'm there, but you can now go and look at something else now. Did you enjoy that, everybody? It was all right, wasn't it?